Reading the Women's Prize long list is a highlight of my reading year. Not every book, but the list as a whole is always brilliant. And I've just finished it now, so it's time to tell you what I think about the individual books. At the end of this video, I'll tell you my rankings, my shortlist, I'll predict a winner, so watch until the end and get all that good stuff. But let's get straight into the books. Glory, NoViolet, Bulawayo. Straight off the bat, we have a book that will divide readers. The marketing of this book is as an African version of Animal Farm, and I think that's created the wrong expectation amongst readers. This has maybe left some readers to be disappointed that Bulawayo hasn't delivered exactly what they were expecting. Marketing and expectation settings play a massive role in our enjoyment of books, so it's a bit disappointing that Penguin have gone down a more clickbaity high sales path and jumped on the Orwell train instead of accurately representing Bulawayo's fantastic work. While both Animal Farm and Glory are political satires that are retellings of important historical events through anthropomorphized people, that is the end of these similarities. It is superficial. I wouldn't necessarily say that if you liked Animal Farm, you would definitely like Glory, and if you hated Animal Farm, you will hate Glory. While personally my opinions of these books match, the reasons for enjoying the books are very different. Set in the fictional country of Jadata, we follow the old horse as he looks after his animal kingdom. Bulawayo is telling us the story of Zimbabwe and the coup that ousted Robert Mugabe. But by changing the names of the countries, by turning the major players into animals, she is stripping them of their identity. This book isn't actually about Zimbabwe, but where power comes from, how we control a country, how is a country won? How is it kept? How does power affect those at the tops? And how do the actions of those at the top affect common people? Let's make this really clear. Your knowledge of Zimbabwe, understanding who the characters represent, that is completely irrelevant to your enjoyment of this book. I would go so far as to say knowing that this is a retelling of a historical event has caused some reviewers to not see the deeper message in Bulawayo's work. Bulawayo has an unconventional writing style which may alienate some readers. Her use of repetition creates a scratched record, slightly staccato feel to the novel. Pages and pages of the line, "I can't breathe," is impactful and powerful, but it does have the potential to be boring and repetitive as well. To demonstrate my earlier point, what does the George Floyd reference add to a tale of Zimbabwe? Certainly not as much as it adds to a book about power and control of a population. What is common between the George Floyd retelling and the fear that residents of Jadata feel towards military interference in their free, fair and credible elections? This book is hilarious. Jadata didn't just have a sitting president, we had a shitting president too. I love that line. This is political satire at its finest. If you enjoyed books such as The White Tiger, The Master and Margarita, or Catch-22, the balance of political and humour that those books have is really represented in Glory too. But it does something different to those novels too. This book really takes the time to centre women, to look at how they are oppressed, how the women up high are kept from power, and how the common women are mistreated and distrusted, and how they're all sexualised. And it is definitely one of the more literary novels on the long list. Homesick by Jennifer Croft. There was some controversy about this book even being on the long list. There is a question of eligibility. Originally written in Spanish and then released in Argentina, the author rewrote it and released it as a memoir in the US, and finally reimagined it as a novel in the UK. Does this count as a translation? Previously, the rules have stated that a book must be published in the UK within 2 years of an overseas publication to be eligible, which would make Homesick ineligible. But that condition is not in the rules this year. All entries must be first published as a print or ebook edition in the UK between the 1st of April 2022 and the 31st of March 2023, but may have been previously published outside the UK. Regardless of the controversy, it was longlisted. It is available to read. Really, the question you want to know is it any good? Should you read it? This is the story of two sisters, Amy and Zoe. Older sister Amy is incredibly gifted. Younger sister Zoe is having seizures and requires brain surgery. The two sisters are quite close and they have a weird rivalry, picking disagreements over Russia and Ukraine. Now, please note that this is based in the 90s before Putin invaded. Both girls are homeschooled because of Zoe's illness, and Sasha, a Ukrainian man who speaks both Ukraine and Russian, is employed to teach the sisters both languages. Amy is clearly a fictitious version of Jennifer Croft. Later in the story, telling of going to Poland and subsequently winning the most prestigious award a translator can, Croft won the Booker International Award for her translation of Flights by Olga Taracka. Croft speaks multiple languages as well as Polish. She's also translated several Argentinian novels into English, and knowing that, you can really see her language learning and develop throughout this story. You kind of have to wonder, what is the difference between autofiction and memoir, changing your name from Jennifer to Amy? Amy's ability to learn language isn't central to the novel. The relationship between sisters are, and that's a slip. That's where I see this book as a novel and not a memoir. This is a book that focuses on two sisters, 3 years apart, with very different prospects in life. It is told in super short chapters, only 1 or 2 pages in length each, and always about a different event. There isn't very much in this book to keep you reading. It is very simple. While I wouldn't exactly call this book plotless, I certainly wouldn't say that plot was of the highest concern to Croft when she was writing it. The parents play a role of side characters, missing for chunks of the novel only to come in and disrupt things. Sometimes that disruption is to talk about Zoe going to hospital and deciding if they're going to operate on her brain. So that is to say that they are pivotal characters, but not central. Stylistically, one could see a comparison with somebody like Sally Rooney, for example, although not nearly as political, and in a novel where sex is of much less importance. Fans of Cold Enough for Snow might enjoy this novel about a changing relationship. I would also say that this is a less sinister, less cynical version of the Book of Goose. But the truth be told, I don't think Homesick stands up to the comparison between Rooney, Cold Enough for Snow, or the Book of Goose. It is just lacking in complexity. It feels like Croft didn't know if she was writing fiction or non-fiction, afraid to add elements that weren't true that would add depth to the novel, trapped by what actually happened instead of what would have made a good book. Fire Rush. Jacqueline Crooks. I think that this is the most exciting book on the long list. Set in the West Indian communities in London and Bristol and in Jamaica during the 1980s. The plot takes some time to invest in, but once you're invested, the story of Yamini is unputdownable. This is one of these lovely blended genre novels. It is a story about racism, police violence, gang violence, domestic violence, fear, black people being trapped, women being trapped. But it also has that fast feeling that a thriller has. While the twists in this book don't have the complete 180-degree turns that some thrillers have, you still don't really know what's going to happen next. You are legitimately scared for Yamini for the entire second half of this book. But everything that happens to Yamini reflects something that is true for a woman belonging to the Jamaican diaspora. And Yamini is such a cool character. She is a DJ. This is a book about music. Lots of people have already said, read the audiobook for this, and I have to say that the short musical riffs between chapters really added to the experience. This is a book that could legitimately release a soundtrack and people would buy it. And finding a book to compare this to, finding a book that was similar to this, that's really hard because it takes bits from here and there and puts them all together. When this book was announced on the long list, I thought of the two most recent novels from the Caribbean on the Woman's Prize long list, The Bread the Devil Needs and How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House. And these two books do have similarities. They're emotionally tense novels about safety and domestic violence, toxic men, and to categorize Fire Rush as that book is to sell it short. It's to oversimplify it. It doesn't do the tension quite as well as those two novels, but then it's not trying to. It's taking a broader look at things, and it loses some of the brutality, but not much of the message, and it adds hope. It's not entirely brutally sad. We're also going to look at police violence and gang violence, at drugs and crime and trauma, and Crooks is presenting these things for you to consider. She's not discussing them, she's showing you them. There isn't a lot of hand-holding in this book, or really on the long list in general, and it kind of feels a little bit mismatched in Fire Rush because this is a plot that could have been out of a trashy pulp fiction novel, except that it is done with these emotionally complex characters, these systematic issues, these traumas. And then what it does is it says, put it all together yourself, I'm going to wax lyrical about music. It's really trusting the reader. Or, maybe it's acknowledging that different readers are going to get different things out of this novel. Crooks is writing in a Jamaican dialect. Think blood clot, bad, rarsehole, batty. If you've not read Jamaican literature before, it might be a bit tough for some readers. I really feel like it adds a sense of belonging, a sense of setting to this novel, and it plays into the music and creates this brilliant feel to the novel, to the setting, and it turns the Jamaican dialect up or down depending on how much ganja has been smoked or the general emotion of the situation. I think it's a really effective tool. The only book I think that I could possibly compare this to is A Brief History of 7 Killings by Marlon James. It is not as brutal or as long. It is more feminist. It is not as complex. It is much less queer, although still has a hint of Sappho in it. It is more about music, and none of these things necessarily make this book better or worse than the James novel. It's just its own flavour. This book is for black feminists, for people who like music, and anybody who enjoys their heart in their mouth. Children of Paradise, Camilla Grudova. Sex, drugs, classic cinema, and other people's bathroom habits. Let's get the big one out of the way first. If bloody fluids gross you out, don't read this book. There's a variety of them, and they're in a lot of different scenes. I'm not that reader, but I know that some people out there really struggle with this, so trigger warning. Holly has a new job at Paradise, the oldest cinema in the city. She works with a collection of misfits and oddballs, and after some time, she wins their trust and becomes one of the gang. This book approaches the surreal without ever crossing the line into what the fuck just happened territory. We see Holly's relationship within the cinema grow and develop, but it's also the cinema that is growing and developing, not physically. I said it's not surreal, but through the change of ownership, through renovation, through different staff, through new policies. At times I thought this was a lovely socialist novel demonstrating how neoliberalism has slowly pushed big companies to stop seeing their employees as people and generally treating them worse and worse. But then I also thought that Holly was literally doing drugs while she was at work and getting criticised for reading her novel instead of doing her job. Maybe this book is exploring both sides. Maybe this book is saying that the worse you treat employees, the worse they become. And maybe I'm looking for meaning in a novel where there is just a bunch of movie references. This is a book all about setting and feel. Take the magic out of novels such as Piranesi or The Night Circus and replace it with a noir movie aesthetic and characters I would affectionately call weirdos and misfits. And that's what this book is. This is a book for readers who enjoy getting lost in a location. Again, this is a book that isn't doing a lot of the heavy lifting for you. It's presenting character relationships and a weird setting and letting you take what you will from it. However, I feel like this is really inconsistent. Holly was an introspective character. She was happy to puzzle over how she would get the other employees at Paradise to like her. But she didn't think twice about being the victim of violence during a sexual act. Not even to mention whether it hurt or whether she felt scared. I think that was particularly poorly done. It wouldn't take much to read that as a glorification of non-consensual violence during sex, something which I'm sure was not the author's intent. To compare this to Fire Rush, when similar things happened in Fire Rush, Yemeni, our protagonist, is getting this feeling of trapped, of hopelessness, of anger and fear. But all I'm getting from Holly is non-traumatic detachment. To be fair, Holly is outwardly detached too, but I think that this is an inconsistency and leaves a poor message without creating a discussion. The characters themselves feel much more like a collection of stereotypes than fully formed characters with depth. There is an intentional token effort made with the plot. The plot certainly is not the point of the novel, but I also feel like there was very few themes to sink your teeth into. Everything really hinges on the setting and the hope that you're a mega fan of whichever movie is being referenced in the particular chapter you're reading. A quirky book that I see being very much love it or hate it. Stoneblind by Natalie Haynes, a feminist retelling of the Medusa myth. It is the retelling of a myth, so you know that the plot is going to be solid, and it's feminist, so you know the role of women and how they're exploited by men and their lives will be explored. And I'm sure Natalie Haynes fans already knew this, but I didn't. She's very funny. I particularly like the scene where Zeus was trying to solve his headache by being hit in the head with an axe. The line, "I'm not sure this is a very good idea," was quite amusing. This book is delivering what it says it's going to deliver. A funny, feminist retelling of a Greek myth. Is it doing anything particularly beyond that? Not really. But does it need to? This is another book I read on audio, and I really recommend you read this on audio too. It is read by Natalie Haynes, and who better to understand the way something is meant to be delivered, the sly and subtle changes in tones that make the humour in this novel pop. Character-wise, I think Haynes was quite effective. She is assuming that you know these characters already, but she is still embellishing the aspects of their personality to suit the humour, the plot, or the message of the scene. I particularly enjoyed the characterization of Zeus. I think Zeus is the perfect comedic character to send up. Haynes is take the piss funny, but this book isn't doing anything revolutionary or new. The feminist themes were, let's face it, pretty basic. I don't disagree with anything she says or she's done, but I don't find them particularly earth-shattering. I think you know if you wanted to read this book from the moment I said it is a feminist retelling of the Medusa myth. And regardless of which side of the fence you fall on, I don't think there's anything in the book to suggest that you would be wrong in your initial judgment. Trespasses by Louise Kennedy. I feel like this is a section where we discuss the woman's prize cliches books. We've had our Greek myth, now let's have an Irish book about the Troubles. But just because a lot of books have similar settings doesn't mean Louise Kennedy can't find something new to write about. Indeed, I think she does. Kushla lives in a small town near Belfast. She is a teacher at a parochial school, and at night she helps out in her family pub. And that's where she meets Michael, an older married man, a Protestant. But Kushla is drawn to him. This is a romance novel, but I wouldn't recommend it to romance readers unless they had quite dark taste. This is quite a slow book to get going, but once it gets going, it sort of rip-roars to the end. But you do need to be patient. You can see the elements for a good book being put in place. A woman in her 20s dating an older man in his 40s, and it's quite a feminist look at that. We see Michael take more than he gives. He's disappointed Kushla isn't a virgin. It's a bit gross. There's also the sin of cheating, the Catholic belief, and all that makes for an interesting book without the background of a war in which both people find themselves on opposite sides. One of the things I find most unsettling about this book, and books set in the Troubles in general, is the normality of life, how it continues almost uninterrupted by the conflict. Something we see not just in Trespasses, but in Black Butterflies later on. I'm going to guess that if you're attracted to books such as The Factory Girls, The Colony, Before My Actual Heart Breaks, Milkman, and other books set in the Troubles, then you're going to be attracted to this book too. And I think that's fair. And I think that is a good way to judge if you'll like this book. But what are you getting different with Trespasses? All of these books look at common people and relationships within the Troubles, and so does Trespasses. But Trespasses feels a bit more about a relationship than people in general. And because of that, it can focus on Catholic and Protestant communities alike. This book is quite slow paced, and it is only really in the last 50 or 60 pages that things start to happen. And that's going to cause some readers to call it boring or say that they're not connecting with the story. Demon Copperhead, Barbara Kingsolver. This is a retelling of David Copperfield, and a lot of people are asking the question, do I need to have read the Dickens novel before I read this one? And the answer is no. No, you don't. I recommend that you don't read the Dickens novel before you read Demon Copperhead. This is a book I think that is suited to either not knowing the story of David Copperfield at all, or being a massive fan of David Copperfield and being at the point where you were ready to reread it. As somebody who neither loved or hated David Copperfield but has read it and is familiar with the story, This was completely predictable. And as a result, this is the first book on the long list that I didn't finish. I exited about halfway through, but I don't think that this is a bad book. I just think I fall into a relatively small category of people who won't get a lot out of this book. Kingsolver is reimagining Dickens to include a real southern drug trade scheme, but she still has a Dickensian plot, she has over-the-top characters, and a criticism of society's treatment for those born into families without money. Kingsolver is saying, hey, Dickens wrote Copperfield 173 years ago. It is now an important work in the literary canon. It is one of the best known stories of our time. But have we learnt from it? We haven't addressed the issues Dickens brought up. We have the same system oppressing people in the same ways. It is a modernisation of Dickens for a generation, a society that desperately needs to learn the lessons that he was including in his novels. I'm also quite impressed with Kingsolver's ability to completely change the style of her writing to suit the story she is writing. It takes a really talented author to be able to do that. Despite this not personally working for me, I can objectively see that this is a fantastic novel, and I think that this is a genuine contender for the prize. Cursed Bread, Sophie Mackintosh. A gothic and very sexual historical fiction about a baker's wife, Elodie, who is unfulfilled in her relationship, and the wife of an ambassador, Violet, who, seen through the eyes of Elodie, is much more confident, sexually attractive, manipulative, and direct in her desire. Based on a historical event, an unsolved mass poisoning in a French village in 1951, Sophie Mackintosh turns this into a tale of desire, love, and the need to feel wanted. Despite this being based on a historical event, Mackintosh does her best to take as much of the plot out of it as possible, instead focusing on the themes of domestic violence, sexual violence, kink, lust, desire, power, sexual power, confidence, and the power attractive people have. The characters and plots really only exist in reference to these themes. How well do I know the character of Elodie at the end of this? I know what makes her happy in the bedroom, but not what she likes to talk about over dinner. Except if that is maybe what makes her happy in the bedroom. It is a voyeuristic, overly sexed novel, and to the detriment of the rest of the book. Nobody could say that this is a book that lacks focus, but it neglects the mystery, the poisoning, the plot, the characters, everything. I believe that Mackintosh is aiming for something similar to We Have Always Lived in the Castle, but has overly focused on the sex she wanted to include and add to that, ignoring the poisoning. I don't think this is a book that has achieved what it intends to, and subsequently, I just don't recommend it. But it does depict two problematic relationships that are unhealthy for very different reasons, and that will create conversation. It is also a very literary work. There are all sorts of little things you can puzzle out. You know, whenever bread is mentioned, you can view that as nourishment, and then you can look at how these relationships are nourished. You can look at how the women are known through their men, and the men known through their occupation. The grocer's wife, for example. And you can look at the differences between the occupations, baker, grocer, ambassador. So if you like that sort of slow puzzle things out kind of book, you might enjoy this novel. The Dog of the North, Elizabeth McKenzie. 5 years ago, Penny's mother and stepfather went missing in outback Australia. Penny's marriage is over, so too is her employment, and she's, for some reason that doesn't seem to make sense to me, hanging out with her grandmother's accountant. Penny's grandmother is some sort of doctor dreaming of following in the footsteps of Frankenstein. This is a book that is intentionally ridiculous. It is the intentional style of humour McKenzie is using. And there are things such as two brothers sharing a toupee. And the thing is, that concept is the joke. I think this is absolutely terrible comedy writing. I kept legitimately not thinking that this was comedy because despite the barrage of idiotic ideas, there were just no jokes. McKenzie is either completely detached from the real world to an extent where you wonder if she knows how hospitals, the police, and a variety of institutions work, or if she's intentionally been ridiculous to take the piss and has forgotten to make things funny. I guess there are some themes around poverty and how the world treats us, but they're not really explored. There's a plot, but it makes no sense, and I think I would say the same about the characters and the setting. The writing is, fine. If you laughed when I said about the two brothers sharing a toupee, or think the idea of a doctor not understanding that the police might have a problem with her hiding bodies in her house, then this is a book for you. But I think this book is completely without merit, and never have I come across a novel that I think a smaller section of the population would be interested in reading. This book is a semi-viable alternative for people who will literally read the back of a cereal box and they're all out of cornflakes. I'm trying to be very objective with these reviews. I would legitimately be very upset if I read a worse book this year. Terrible, unconstructed nonsense. Black Butterflies. Priscilla Morris. Zora is a teacher and an artist, a painter of landscapes living in Sarajevo in the spring of 1992. When violence breaks out, she sends her husband and mother to safety to live with her daughter in England, staying behind to stop looters from taking their possessions, from inhabiting her mother's house. She thinks that everybody will be gone for a few weeks. But Zora soon discovers that she is trapped. Nobody can leave Sarajevo. Food prices increase. A dead body is found on the street. Sarajevo is under siege. There are shelling, and things slowly get worse and worse for Zora. I am old enough to remember Yugoslavia breaking up and the terrible war that took place there. But from the outside, we only really see that this town was taken today, that these graves were found. We get to see the army, and we don't get to see the slow attrition of the people and how they are forced to live. And this is what this book delivers. Time doesn't stand still for them. Zora is still teaching right up towards the end of this novel. She's still living a normal life despite the obstacles, despite skipping meals, despite not having running water. We don't just see the lows, we don't just see the miseries, but we also, and this is bizarrely depressing, we see the highlights of her life as she lives under siege. And that, I think, is so effective at demonstrating the position that she is in. The time power was cut and all their freezers started to defrost and not hold the temperature. And they had to barbecue all the meat they were living on and feast on it, otherwise it would go rancid. All the while not knowing where they would get more food from after it was gone. Art was such an important part of this story. The creating of it, the destroying of it, the selling of it, the leaving it behind. And because Zora is a landscape painter, I think that constantly makes you think about how the country will change. We know new borders will be drawn, but what will Sarajevo look like after the siege? What buildings will still be standing? I also didn't know that Bosnia was a mostly secular people, that the Serbs, Croats and Muslim that make up Bosnia all mixed. Bosnians would all enjoy Muslim holidays. Zora was consistently told by army officers that she wasn't allowed somewhere because she wasn't a Serb. She would be yelling back at them that she was indeed a Serb. The idea that cousins could be on different sides of the war because they had different ethnic identities. Of a father berating his son for joining the army, saying, "What would your grandmother think?" And the son saying back, "She's in Belgrade." The pure madness of this world was summed up by Bosnia being a blended people. That by Bosnians not really understanding the difference between Muslims, Serbs and Croats. Character-wise, I thought Zora and her neighbour Mishrad were very well drawn. I loved how these two supported each other. Neighbours who might not have had much to do with each other, having to rely upon each other's assistance. The setting is excellently drawn and eerie, and it doesn't allow you to put these characters down. You are never allowed to feel safe for them. I think this book has what it takes to win this whole prize. If you enjoyed books such as Homefire, The Kite Runner, Factory Girls, or even Louise Kennedy's Trespassing, then this is a book for you. The Marriage Portrait, Maggie O'Farrell. One of the big hitters. A feminist historical fiction set in Renaissance Italy about Lucrezia de Medici, a woman married and dead by age 15. History has accused her husband Alfonso, the Duke of Ferrara, of her murder. Now, there is quite simply not enough information to say if Alfonso did or didn't kill Lucrezia, but there is plenty of evidence of wives being killed by their husband in the same time period. And O'Farrell is discussing that. She is discussing the role of women in this society. This is a coming-of-age story, and I think O'Farrell has created this very interesting character in Lucrezia. She doesn't fit in. She doesn't want to fit in. She doesn't want what her mother has or what her sisters want. She is captivated by a tigress her father has captured and keeps in his personal zoo. She is a talented drawer and very intelligent, often whispering answers to her sisters when they're getting tutored. Almost every woman around her fills the role expected of them, but not Lucrezia. Lucrezia isn't the only well-drawn character in this novel. I don't feel like there's a badly drawn character, to be honest, but Alfonso stands out as an excellent character. He is certainly very much a type of person. There are so many women in this story, and you can look at how their roles, their power, what they are expected to do and what they actually do, what they would like to do, their interests. The nurse, the maid, Lucrezia's mother, Alfonso's sister, Alfonso's mother, the actions and the fates of these women. They really don't just hit home the feminist themes, but they also had a little hint, a little undercurrents of class in there as well. There is more to this novel than just feminism. Told in two timelines that eventually converge, we see Lucrezia, the 15-year-old wife of Alfonso, who has realised that her husband is plotting to kill her, and then we switch back to her as a child. O'Farrell has made this book very two-paced. The murder plot lasts the entire novel, while Lucrezia's life flies by in between. It's an interesting tactic for creating suspense, but I think it's very effective. This is another novel I can see winning the Woman's Prize. I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel. A debut novel, and I'm always curious when a book comes out and so quickly divides readers. Some people love this book and some people hate it. Even if I wasn't reading the Woman's Prize, I feel like I would have had to pick up Sheena Patel's I'm a Fan just to understand what this divide is about. The last book I remember dividing readers so much was Patricia Lockwood's No One Is Talking About This. And there's more than a fair slice of Lockwood in this one. I suspect whatever side you were on for No One Is Talking About This, that's where you're going to land with I'm a Fan. This book is not going to make anybody's most average books of the year list. I stalk a woman on the internet who is sleeping with the same man I am. We're introduced to the three most important characters in the novel in the opening line. The protagonist, our narrator, the man I want to be with, and the woman I'm obsessed with. This book is unapologetically sexual at times. To regain his attention, I pounce on him, push him down so his back is flat against the grass, and I sit on top of him, his phone tumbling out of his hand. I place the centre of my on the bottom of his cock. It is so nice sitting on the heft of him, even through our clothes. He won't let me have him naked. I know this. Desire, longing, and toxic relationships are definitely at the centre of this novel. The man I want to be with, his several women he has on the side, that he cuts off communication randomly, is open about wanting to fuck anybody and then withholds sex, will fill in details about his relationships with other women to the women he is leading on. He's a feminist, but he doesn't practice what he preaches. The woman I'm obsessed with turns out to be a social influencer of some fame, white, with a rich and famous father, perfectly manicuring her garden to look wild. Does she even know if the plants she uses are natives or not? And this is what I really like, that image there. Patel makes that about cultural appropriation. She makes it about race and culture, about how white people want to be coloured, but coloured people want to be white. But what she's saying and what she's showing you are not exactly the same thing. The manicured garden, this is an online presence. We only get to see the idealized version of somebody, and that leaves us to question, what exactly is real? What is put on? Like, which plants are even native? Nobody knows. And which posts are genuine? Which posts are this person? Nobody knows. Patel could have used an unreliable narrator here too. I certainly question if I was being told the truth. But she is brutally honest. She isn't kidding herself about what she is doing. She doesn't think it's healthy. She's manipulative and hardly likable. And it is so much more effective to see somebody lose out on the power dynamic while they're being both strong and cunning. It is so much harder for what Patel is saying to be dismissed that way too. Not that we should deride women for being compliant when they are literally told that is what society expects from them from the moment they're born. I mean, have some empathy, people. Stop blaming women for doing dumb things in books. But by making her strong, Patel is taking this conversation from some women and moving it to all women. But that's not actually what she's doing, because our protagonist acts like a man. And if we can go back to the scene where the base of her is placed on his heft and continue it. I start my laughing like, look at me. Oh, I'm so lighthearted and fun and crazy. I pin his arms back over his head and laugh because this is lighthearted, jovial waterboarding. I asked him if he's going to be with me. He tries to throw me off with his legs, but I clamp down and secure myself. Are you going to be with me? I repeat. Say yes or no. I laugh so he knows this could be a joke. He laughs back nervously, but is wriggling from under me. I sense my creeping desperation. Say yes or no. The words brittle through my gritted teeth. I put more weight onto my hands. We're still having fun. This is still fun, isn't it? He screws up his face and says, you're hurting my hands. She is acting like a man. She is using her physical strength and intentionally trying to blur that line of consent when she has completely overstepped it. This is a book about entitlement, and that she is a woman and that she still loses in every scene, even though she acts like a man, is the point of this book. This is a real contender for the woman's prize. Pod by Laline Paull. This is a book about dolphins. And I think there's a lot you could do when removing humans from a story. This could have been an interesting look at the structure of societies, for example. There is so much you can say about human by demonstrating a different community. But that's not what this book is doing. And full disclosure, this is the third of 4 books on the long list that I DNF'd. I really feel the basic premise of good storytelling is to hook the audience. And with books, there needs to be like a mystery, a conflict, a source of tension, a potential romance, a question that needs answering. And the only question I have with this book is, why fish? Why dolphins? Does anybody remember The Animals of Farthing Wood? It was a series of books released in 1979 and made into a cartoon series in the 90s. And this is a slightly more adult underwater version of that story. The ideas and the themes are so cliched that they appear in a children's novel written over 40 years ago. I even have to ask, is it really that much darker? Animals died all the time in that series. It did make Bambi look a little bit cheerful. I actually really love the message of this book. Animals deserving dignity and the world is going to end. Character-wise, they're not bad. The plot is serviceable. The writing is basic, but not a deterrent. If you're looking for a bit of escapism, this probably shouldn't be the first book you pick up, but if it is sitting on your TBR, it will do the trick. Potentially, it's a good one for nature writing, but not a book that I think is well executed or really adds anything that hasn't been done before. Wandering Souls, Cecile Pin. A family of 6 flees Vietnam on board 2 boats to Hong Kong. We follow the 3 siblings who make it as they start to live life as refugees in the UK after their parents and younger brother drown on their way. Something that I would like to point out, by the way, is a very common way for asylum seekers to die. And this is not the first time that Pin includes facts or historical accuracies in the novel. Margaret Thatcher is quoted, and that adds context, but it also paints a bleak historical picture. The structure of this book is worth commenting on too. It's a non-linear story. There are a lot of different perspectives, including that of the dead brother, and I do feel like quite a lot is covered in a very small space. And for the style of book, this is quite fast-paced, although I probably wouldn't say that it was fast-paced overall, only in comparison to similar novels. This creates quite a jumpy, unsettling feeling. As a result, it could be very challenging to get a feel for the characters. Some readers are not even going to bat an eyelid at that, and some readers are going to be completely put off. So know what you like. Now, the dead brother watching over the series, I thought that worked really well. It added an element of Vietnamese spiritual beliefs to the story. Pin's story is very complex. We hear this is a refugee story and we have some preconceived ideas. And this book doesn't disappoint if that's what you're looking for. But it is also talking about things that are relevant to an immigrant community. The pressures of getting a job, of finding people like you, of missing your homeland, of not acknowledging trauma. It follows a refugee not just to safety, but into their new life. We still have the brutal hardship, the risk and the loss of life on the way. We still have the racism of the host country and the politics and the political resentment towards refugees. It's a vast and complex story, and hopefully you can see my earlier point. This is a lot of things to discuss in 185 pages. But there is a special feel to this novel. It feels like it's done something new. It's given an old style of book a new stamp of life. Because while I get the overall impression that I think the characters were a little weak, there were times that I could really empathise with their experience or positions. Writing-wise, this is beautiful, and make no mistake, Pin is a really rare talent, an author you should remember. The prospect of her improving, as a lot of authors do after their first novel, and perfecting their craft, that's frightening. She has an incredible future ahead of her. This is an emotionally poignant novel about identity and displacement, and I think fans of Homegoing would particularly enjoy this novel. And everything that I have criticised this book for in this review, these are things that I don't imagine the judges or a lot of readers will take issue with. And I think that this is another novel that is a real, genuine contender for the prize. The Bandit Queens, Parini Shroff. Geeta's husband has been missing for 5 years. Rumour has it she killed him. She didn't, but she's not unhappy about those rumours. This is inspired by Phoolan Devi, or maybe it should be that the character Geeta is inspired by Devi, a real-life woman called the Bandit Queen, a Robin Hood figure who punished rapists and later went into politics. And as a side note, she's a really interesting woman. I very much recommend doing a little bit of research and reading up on her. If you get nothing else out of this book, learning about Devi, this badass lady, it's inspiring and it's worth the cost of the book on its own. Although, now that I've reviewed it, you could probably just Google her without buying the book. This is a dark comedy thriller with lines such as, "Why can you kill all these people but you can't kill the dog? Because killing people makes me a Don. Killing a dog just makes me a psychopath." It's also a very feminist story. Women weren't built to endure the rule of men, or the line, "He broke the contract first. When somebody threatens your body, you have every right to protect yourself." This book is slightly poorly marketed because I pictured this as a sort of a cathartic novel along the lines of an elderly lady is up to no good. A group of merry outlaw vigilante women finding rapists and cutting off their junk. Oodalali, golly, what a day. This is so much more complex than I anticipated. The women in this novel are not always working together. They have their own goals, things that they want or need from the world. That honestly sounds great, but there are just so many characters in this book, and they can be really difficult to keep track of. Add in quite a complex book, and this is a book you can easily get lost in, and I mean that in both a positive and negative sense, depending on what sort of reader you are. I feel that this would really appeal to readers who enjoy intergenerational family sagas. This is certainly not the same type of book, but I think that we see this complex web of relationships in both. The small village where you can't fart on one side of it without the other side knowing what you had for breakfast. And this is an incredibly fast-paced novel which I think will appeal to readers of thrillers, which for me I think enhances the problems I've already put forward. This is a novel that is doing too much and too quick and at a very fast pace. Maybe I should take issue with the publishing house. I don't think a debut author could realistically expect to add too many more pages to their manuscript before the publishers say that it's too long. I think Shroff's vision of this novel requires 500 to 600 pages to pull it off successfully. If you can get past the needless complexity of this novel, you are left with something really exciting. Nobody could call this book boring. It is centering women of a lower caste. I think along with Stoneblind and Glory, we have 3 really good and completely different books for readers who like to laugh. Memphis by Tara M. Stringfellow. Last book, and I'm going to be quick with this one because Tara Stringfellow has been attacking reviewers who didn't like aspects of her novels, and this is a book that I DNF'd. This is a book about a black family, and it starts with 3 very traumatic events that happen in different timelines. And emotionally, this just leaves you feeling flat. It's a complete failure. There's nowhere to go. You don't have peaks and troughs. It's just downhill. It is told in a non-linear format in a way that doesn't really add to the story. Actually, as we've already discussed, it really detracted from it. Finally, the author really does expect you to empathize with some very problematic men, but quite simply doesn't draw them well enough or do anything like a good enough job for you to understand these horrible characters' motives. There are a couple of books that I love that are doing similar things to Memphis, but are much more successful. Black Cake and Night Crawling. So I guess I'd recommend Memphis to readers who enjoyed those 2 books, but would really like to be disappointed. I really don't recommend Memphis. Personally, I had a bit of a weird experience with the long list this year. Of my top 5 books, which I'll reveal in a minute, 2 are books that I read before the long list were announced, and the remaining 3 were 3 of the last 4 books I read, which means that I was fairly disappointed in this long list until the end when it really came through and saved itself. In the end, I had 4 5-star reads, which is 1 fewer than last year, but still, I think 1 in 4 is a fantastic ratio for me. Let's get on with my rankings and then my predictions. Starting at the bottom, 16th has to be Dog of the North, worst book on the long list. 15 Memphis, 14 Pod. Don't think that that'll be a surprise after those reviews. I know the other book I DNF'd was Demon Copperfield, but I don't think that that was a bad novel. I actually enjoyed it to begin with, so I'm not putting it in next. Instead, I think 13 is Children of Paradise and 12 is Cursed Bread. These were 2 books that I didn't really like. At 11, I'm putting in Homesick, and then 10 is Demon Copperhead. Going into the books just outside the top 6, 9th is The Bandit Queen, 8 Stoneblind, and 7 is Trespasses. These are 3 books that are very different, and I find them a little bit hard to separate. My top 6 start with 2 books that are fresh. They're great books, and they're delivering something a little bit more than other books of similar descriptions, and that's Wandering Souls and Fire Rush. Now, I personally think these last 4 books really represent my bookish tastes. They're like the 4 corners of books I like. But I want to start with the 2 books that I read before this long list was announced. At number 4 is The Marriage Portrait, and at number 3, Glory. Feminist historical fiction and political satire. I love those types of books, and these are just 2 wonderful examples of those genres. Now it's the hard part, because the 2 books left are very different. Neither book is really coming close to what the other book is doing. But I'm going to leave Black Butterflies and I'm a Fan there and have a quick look at what I think the judges will do and if they'll disagree with me on the shortlist. I think outside of those books that I have placed in my top 6, I can see Demon Copperhead and The Bandit Queen coming into the top 6. That would be it. I would frankly be a little bit surprised if any of the other 8 books make the shortlist. I really think Demon will be shortlisted in particular out of those 2, but when I come to actually taking a book out of the shortlist and replacing it and to get Demon Copperhead in, I find this so difficult. These books are so hard to compare. I don't feel like there's an obvious book to take out. So I'm going to stick with my original 6. And I'm also going to be completely biased in my predictions and declare that my favourite book will be the book that will win. So we have The Devastating Book and The Messy Woman book. And while I think that both books are absolutely amazing, very well executed, and if either of these books win, I will be very, very happy. But there is one book I think that is adding to the literary zeitgeist that will influence future books that has taken a subgenre and done so much more than other authors are doing with it. And that novel is Sheena Patel's I'm a Fan. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and let me know in the comments section what you think of any of the books on the long list. Bye bye.